Hello! This is actually just a couple of hours after filming the previous video. Bit shorter than usual between filming these, but I have a trip tomorrow, so I'm trying to get caught up on these before I leave, um, so that I can comfortably start reading the next book on the trip. So uh, there's a lot of extra stuff to talk about in part 5 here. I'm not sure where to start. In fact, I'm going to start in a somewhat unconventional place. Usually I tend to leave conversations about Hoyd till late in these videos, but I'm going to start with talking about Hoyd, even though he's actually what the book ends on. Because I feel like Hoyd is the thing that I can most contain. Everything else is sort of interconnected, but Hoyd, the revelations about Hoyd here are kind of isolated and unrelated to anything else. So, the important things that we find out here about Hoyd in the epilogue are, well, first of all, apparently Hoyd has some kind of natural healing factor that he has to actively suppress. And even then, he can't stop it altogether. Because he talks about how the missing tooth is something that will be back soon or something, and no matter what he does. So he has some kind of natural healing factor, which might be related to any of the many forms of investiture we've seen that give healing abilities, or it might be a new form of investiture that we're not aware of. So that's one thing. Next, we know from a previous book that Hoyd has full access to all allomantic powers. Probably, presumably, I think. We haven't seen him use them, I think, but he should be a full Mistborn. Here we find out that he has access to Nulthian Awakening, which I'm kind of intrigued by, because I wasn't under the impression that Nulthian Awakening was an ability you could acquire. I kind of just assumed it was just a naturally occurring ability of every single human on Nulthis, because they all had breath. But apparently, Hoyd somehow acquired that ability and can use it on other worlds. I mean, Vivenna / Azure can also apparently use Awakening because she does her scarf towel thing when she wraps it around her arm. So apparently you can use Awakening on other worlds, but apparently you can also use it even if you yourself are not Nulthian, which Hoyd is not. Which is interesting because he failed to acquire any abilities on Cell, as far as we can tell. But all of these are secondary things to what this chapter is about, which is that this chapter ends with Hoyd finding a cryptic, a Lyspren, a pattern, if you will, in the ruins of the palace in Kholinar, which to my mind is a fairly clear indication that this is not just any cryptic. This is in fact the cryptic that was going to bond Elhokar, and then Elhokar was killed moments before he could finish saying his oath. So that's what I think is going on here. I think Hoyd just essentially rescued this cryptic, and then maybe immediately bonded it, because the last thing that happens here is Hoyd begins saying the first oath, which would make him a Lightweaver. So I have theorized in the past that Hoyd might already be a Lightweaver. Apparently that's not the case. Apparently now he is going to be one, but he wasn't one previously when I thought he was. Which is interesting, because he definitely did some stuff that I feel like implies light weaving, maybe? But still. So I'm just keeping a track here of the abilities Hoyt has acquired, because that's clearly important somehow for the larger Cosmere situation. I think there's very little doubt about that. Okay, so that's it for the Hoyt stuff. Now let's move on to the more specifically Stormlight stuff that's less Cosmere, and then we'll get back to Cosmere stuff at the end, because I have some stuff to talk about. Um, so, uh, stuff that's really interesting to me. Actually, I'm not going to talk necessarily about the plot here for a moment. I'm going to talk about something else. I talked in, I think, like 2 videos ago or something. I talked about the issue of disability, specifically physical disability, and its portrayal in this book, and how I feel like there might be some slight concerns there. Um, we do get a disabled character who does not get instantly magically cured of their disability in this section of the book, which is great. I mean, I think she'd want to be, probably. I feel like it's not great for her because she wants to be, but it's great that we're actually going to get some disability representation that's going to stick around in the form of Risen. Now, of course, Risen is, I am aware, the central character of the novella that I'm going to read next. Uh, so I am taking a bit of a risk when I say that she is not going to get cured of her disability. She might become a Knight Radiant by the end of that. But for now, Risen is maybe the only physically disabled character we've got who hasn't acquired the ability to heal themselves. Um, Even like a minor nameless character who Lopen encounters here in this section, who loses an arm, it's heavily implied that that guy is going to become a Windrunner at some point, or at least a Windrunner Squire in the future. So, um, yeah, I've said before I don't know how to feel about that, because I personally don't have a stake in the issue, and I've seen people who do have a stake in the issue have very different, diametrically opposed positions on it. So I'm not casting any judgment. I'm just sort of pointing out something I've noticed, and leaving it open to interpretation for now. Like I said, I'm sure there has been stuff written by uh, disabled people about the way that about this particular issue in these books. In fact, I'm sure there's been stuff written that both supports it and detracts, because that's how this particular debate always seems to go. Um, anyway, now speaking of Risen, aside from the issue of her disability, Risen is also suddenly much more important than she was. I can definitely see why there's going to be a novella about her. Because Risen now has a pet creature of some kind, Chiri Chiri, that she got on the Reshi Isles. And Chiri Chiri, I am almost certain, has an unmade inside her right now. I don't know which unmade. Um, my working theory is that it might be the unmade whose name I can't remember right now. It has like a 3-part name, who was sort of a leader among the singers after uh, after the desolations were over. From what I remember, in one of I believe something like that was mentioned. My current working theory is that that's who is in the who was in the King's Drop, um, And I also think that the removal of that particular unmade might be what turned the singers into the Parshmen, robbing them of their connection and their identity. That's connection and identity with capital C and capital I, of course, as the magical concepts here. Um, so that's interesting. That's something I'm looking forward to reading about in the novella. What else have we got here that's going to be interesting in the future? So obviously, we now also have one of the unmade has been released from its prison and also placed in a new prison in the form of Chiri Chiri, and a different unmade, Nergaul, has been imprisoned in that same prison. Um, I something tells me Nergaul will not simply remain within that ruby for the rest of this series. I don't think that we'll see Nergaul break free or be broken free in the next book. That would be too soon. But I feel like Nergaul is now a bit of a smoking gun. Not smoking gun. What am I talking about? Chekhov's gun is what I meant to say. Different gun themed phrase. So I'm sure we'll see more of Nergaul. And one of the reasons I'm sure we'll see more of Nergaul is that Nergaul appears to be the means by which Odium can possess people. And the ability of Odium to possess people, I shouldn't say people, the ability of Odium to possess humans is a new reveal here, and also one that I feel like has not seen its full potential utilized yet, so I'm sure we'll see more of it in the future. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It feels a bit. It's implied that like the humans he can possess have to be specifically, or rather, the humans Nergaul can possess. I should be specific here. It's not actually Odium possessing them, it's Nergaul possessing them, and then Odium somehow controlling them, I think. It's implied that Odium has to do some groundwork on those specific humans and like spend some time preparing them for that. It's implied that Odium has been whispering in the ears of Sadeas's men and Amaram for quite some time now. I believe he actually said it decades at one point. So it does take a lot of preparation. He can't just possess whoever he wants. He couldn't just like snap his fingers and send Nergaul to possess Kaladin or something. Which is good because that would be pretty cheap, I think, narratively. So I don't necessarily think it's an issue that Odium is able to do this. I am glad that it's not that Nergaul has been at least temporarily removed from Odium's arsenal, because I feel like if Odium just started possessing people regularly and doing this, basically what he did here, every time there's a major conflict, I feel like that would get a bit old, and I think Brandon is smart for showing us this terrifying power and then taking it off the table for the foreseeable future, so that it can come back at a later date. What else happened here? We also, okay, I want to talk about cultivation. So cultivation has some mysterious motives. It is consistently unclear whether cultivation is an ally of honor or just a third side to the rivalry between the shards on Roshar, like basically equally opposed to both honor and odium. Her actions here, she basically perfectly molded Dalinar, gave him exactly what he needed in order to defeat odium here. And her actions here kind of imply that she might have done that, that she might be an actual ally of honor. But I think she also said that, like, she's doing this not because, but in spite of the fact that it will ultimately help honor. So I think there was at least a sense of some enmity between honor and cultivation. How much exactly is unclear. Um, what else? What else? What else? What else? Uh, yeah. We actually get something really interesting from Talonel here, or Town. So Talonel or Town says, well, in his moment of lucidity, he says that it's actually great that the other heralds abandoned their duty, because them doing so actually is the thing that allowed humanity to progress between desolations more than they have historically been able to do. And this is actually a thought I had earlier, back when the whole Herald situation was revealed earlier in the book. I actually had the thought of, like, I mean, on the one hand, it was like a dick move for the Heralds to do what they did, like to Talonel specifically, but on the other hand, it was kind of like a really good and smart move in terms of saving the world. That wasn't their motive. Their motives were selfish, if completely understandable, but, like, they accomplished something good either way. It's good that they did that, which sounds like a mean thing to say about for poor Talonel, but it is good for humanity that they did that. Um, but speaking of the heralds and their eternal torture, what we learn here is really interesting. What we learn here is that what we've been calling damnation, like the place where the heralds go when they die, and also the place where the souls of the fused reside between desolations, is not, as I had been assuming, somewhere in the cognitive or spiritual realms. I'd assumed it was like a pocket dimension within one of those realms. Apparently, it's a planet. It's Braze, which is one of the other two inhabited planets in the Rosharan system. Which makes me think that the inhabitants of that planet, which are mentioned in Chris's line about the Rosharan system in Arcanum Unbounded, the inhabitants she speaks of aren't actually humans, as I had suspected. They're the what she's referring to there are actually the souls of the fused. Maybe. I could be wrong. Whilst I'm curious to learn more about Braze and what's going on there, but that's what I'm getting right now, which could be really, really interesting if that is the case. Um, let's see what else happened here. Um, I mean, there's a lot that happened here, but a lot of it is also just like vague hints for the future that I don't really have much to say about now, and I don't really feel the need to talk about it now. I will say, so I'm going to focus on some of the stuff I have something interesting to say. Um, so, Teravangian. Teravangian has now come clean to an extent to Dalinar. Uh, not near. When I say come clean, I mean he's lied in a more honest way, I guess. Like, he's made his lie slightly smaller by admitting that he is like a scheming, manipulating bastard, essentially, but not admitting what his actual motives or plans are. And he's also entered into a deal with Odium, which is bad. Uh, Not just because the chances of Odium honoring such a deal are very small, but also because even if he does honor the deal, it's a terrible deal. And I can't help but wonder, why is Teravangian so convinced that this is the right thing to do? Because I think that Teravangian's friends, Adrotaja and Mral, I believe, are right in that the diagram has now proven to be fairly unreliable. Things that they assumed would happen according to the diagram have just not happened. And they have not happened in ways that to me indicate that Dalinar and his coalition have a decent chance of beating Odium. If I were Teravangian, I would be reconsidering my belief that making a deal with Odium is the way to go. I would be looking at Dalinar and what just happened and thinking, oh, I guess I was wrong. Maybe we can win this. But I suppose maybe Teravangian still knows something I don't. Or he just trusts the diagram to such an extent that even when it's blatantly wrong, he still trusts it somehow. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why he still trusts that thing. Um, so it's interesting though. It's interesting that he makes the deal with Odium here to save Kharbranth and doom the rest of the world. Um, and he makes this deal once he's backed into a corner. It was not his original plan to do this. This was like a spur of the moment decision. His actual plan was to save everyone that he rules over and then to manipulate events so that he would rule the entire world and basically sort of trick Odium into sparing all of humanity. And that's really interesting because that was not my impression. My impression so far, my assumption, has been that his only goal is preserving Kharbranth. My assumption has been that when he talked about the horrible sacrifices that must be made, he actually meant that he was going to sacrifice the world for Kharbranth. But apparently that wasn't the plan until now. Now it is. Um, I, I mean, it's definitely a bad plan. Uh, I don't know what else to say. Um, that's all I have to say about Teravangian. Let's move on to a different topic. So I've talked about some potentially problematic ways that disability is portrayed. Let's talk about some of the positives in that respect. Renarin. So we finally get some Renarin POV bits and pieces here, and I, again, I don't have any authority here, but my impression is that this is a pretty well written and well executed case of an autistic character, but autistic in a meaningfully different way from someone like Steris in Mistborn Era 2. I don't think he can compare with Steris. Steris is still much more interesting and much better. Oh, sorry. Just because just because we've had more of her. Like Renarin has been a very minor background character until now. But I do think that so far, I can't say that Sanderson has made any major missteps that I've noticed with Renarin in terms of writing his autism. What else happened here that is relevant? There's a couple of minor things I do want to talk about just because I found them amusing. So, there is this line from Dalinar near the end of the book. We took shard blades from the women, he thought, glancing at the one hung on the wall above his desk. And they seized literacy from us. Who got the better deal, I wonder? And listen, I'm not going to downplay the fact that Vorinism is still a fairly patriarchal culture, but if we're just talking about that particular trade, I think there is no argument to be made that men got the better deal there. That, like, the women definitely got the better deal because Dalinar, you can't read. That's a much bigger issue than not having a fancy sword. I mean, you also don't have a shard blade, but that's most men don't have shard blades, but most women can read. It's like, I don't think that's a fair comparison, really. Like, reading is a much bigger deal. Literacy is a much bigger deal. Of course, now he can read, and so can Renarin. We're getting some breaking down of the gender norms. You're getting women warriors with shard blades, and we're getting men who read, which is nice. I like to see some hopefully permanent social change in my fantasy. Um, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Um, let's see, what else? Moash has a knife that can permanently kill a herald, and he has permanently killed Jezrien. Um, I would presume that, at least based on the current rules, assuming that the pact the heralds made with honor doesn't get altered or changed, or some alternate solution isn't found, I would assume that based on the current rules, uh, if all 10 heralds were permanently killed and therefore their souls were no longer capable of blocking the path from damnation slash braze, then there would be no possible way to end the desolation. Um, ever. So that would be a very bad thing if that happened. Um, yeah. Okay, I think, let me just see, is that everything I had to say here? I think it was. Okay, now I can talk about the big thing here. Spoilers ahead for Mistborn Era 2 in 3, 2, 1. So, in Mistborn Era 2, there is an entity that people seem to believe is a god called Trell, which is encroaching on Scadrial. Sazed slash Harmony visualizes this entity as a red aura, literally physically encroaching on the planet from outside, implying that it's coming from elsewhere. It's not native to Scadrial, whatever it is. It's new. And one of the ways in which Trell seems to manifest is giving people associated with it glowing red eyes. That's kind of a big deal. Now, at the time when I read Bands of Mourning and got to the end, I did actually make the prediction that Trell might be Odium. And at the time, that was like kind of a wild stab in the dark. Now I'm more confident. Trell is either Odium himself or possibly something else, but using Ner'ghaul. Um, I think it would be kind of weird if there were two things in the Cosmere that possess people and give them glowing red eyes. I feel like that should. I feel like if I were Brandon, I wouldn't make these things so similar in their descriptions unless they were meant to be connected. So I'm going to assume that whatever is going on Scadrial is in some way connected to Ner'ghaul specifically, or perhaps Odium. There's several theories I've got for that, which all depend kind of on the timeline here. Like, I'm not sure. It's very much unclear when Stormlight Archive takes place in relation to Mistborn Era 2. If Stormlight Archive takes place before Mistborn Era 2, then whatever is happening on Scadrial, if it is related to Odium, would kind of imply that Odium doesn't get defeated in Stormlight Archive at all. Um, the other option is, of course, that Stormlight Archive is happening after Mistborn Era 2, in which case this might be one of Odium's infamous assaults on other planets that we are witnessing in Mistborn Era 2. I think this second theory is much likelier than the first, but I have a third theory. So, we know that there is going to be a hiatus in Stormlight Archive after Book 5, and during that hiatus, I believe Brandon has said that he intends to publish the entirety of Mistborn Era 3 before continuing with Stormlight Archive. What this tells me is that whatever happens in Mistborn Era 3 is going to be incredibly important for the Stormlight Archive going forward. And my theory on that is that that's somehow related to the way we're seeing Odium happening over there. Perhaps Mistborn Era 2 takes place before the Stormlight Archive, and Odium traveled in the past to Scadrial to cause trouble, and that's the events we're seeing in Mistborn Era 2. And then, once that whole conflict is presumably resolved in the fourth Era 2 book, which is coming out soon, then in the future, once Scadrians develop spaceflight, which we know they will, they might go out seeking for the source of this terrible thing that was inflicted on them, that they barely survived. And in seeking this source, they might end up on Roshar. And at that point, Stormlight and Mistborn might sync up. I don't know how much weight there is to this theory. I don't know if this carries any water. That's not a phrase. Is it a phrase? Is that a phrase in English? This doesn't carry water. Hold water. Hold water. That's the phrase. I don't know if this holds any water, but that's kind of what I think is happening here. It's a very wild out there theory that I cannot in any way, like, there's no evidence for it, there's just circumstantial evidence. I guess we'll see. Part of me hopes I'm right because it would be really cool and interesting, and a part of me hopes I'm wrong because I want to be surprised. Anyway, I'm going to, I'm going to go on a trip to Greece actually, but while I'm on my trip, I will be reading whatever the Risen novella is called. I'm blanking on its name right now. Dawn Shard. I'm going to be reading Dawn Shard. And I might get a chance to record while I'm in Greece, or I might not. We'll see how that goes. You might only get one Dawn Shard video. Hopefully, I'll get a chance to record, and I'll be able to make the best choice based on the content of the book. So, I'm going to go pack now, actually. See you next time for Dawn Shard. And remember, the most important step a man can take is always the next one.